We acknowledge the Ancient Ones, the Greater Shamanic Council of Light, Hermes, both Trismegistus and Seshet, Lady of the Measuring Cord, as above, so below, as within, so without. We acknowledge Imhotep, architect of the cosmos. May the earth be the mirror of heaven. We acknowledge the sacred order of the Magi, and all throughout history who knew, like now, a turning of the ages. We acknowledge the master builders of Göbekli Tepe and the great shining ones at Kalash. The courage and knowledge of the Polynesian wayfinders traversing the great oceans. We acknowledge the prophetic traditions of Ezekiel and Daniel, the traditions of Avalon, the Merlin, and the Round Table, the calendric wizardry of the Maya, and the Venus teachings from Mesoamerica, the Jupiter teachings originating in China, and the Vedic lunar mansion traditions, the Babylonian and Sumerian sidereal zodiacs, the brilliant Hellenistic invention of the seasonal zodiac. The Neolithic peoples around the planet, some still today, honoring the sacred connection between the land and the sky. The Tuatha De Danann in Ireland, who created a time of 2,000 years of peace, the builders of Newgrange. My teachers that are not in human form, Mount Shasta, the Grandfather Rock at the Wonderland of Rocks in Joshua Tree, Mount Haleakala on Maui, the Fish Lake Valley, Hierophany, and the sacred landscapes around the planet, the astrosophy of Rudolf Steiner, and the esoteric astrology of DK in the Tibetan, both presaging the shamanic astrology paradigm, and particularly the archetypal visions of C.G. Jung and the cosmology of my mentor, Dane Rajar. For these and more we give thanks. Hi everyone, it's that time of the month that I get to do my video blog rant. I get to do this one today with Mary Kern again. Thank you for helping me out with this. And the subject today is kind of a follow-up to the article that I wrote in a previous newsletter about the eclipse season. And we're recording this a few days before the new moon and the solar eclipse. And we hope to have this in the newsletter that you hopefully will get before the actual new moon and the full moon. So we have a lot to discuss with this. And Mary, and as we speak today, it's April 28th in the United States, and it's about 9 a.m. here, April 29th over here in South Asia, Southeast. So anyway, we're ready to get started, and let's look at the, thanks, Mary, and we'll get the first slide up.
Thank you, Daniel. I think people are going to love this. Here we go.
Yes.
Our 2022 eclipse cycle, and
there's, yes. So do we? I don't see anything up there
yet. Okay, so we will do that. Share screen came up for me.
It's I only see half. There we go.
Okay.
All right. So this is about the 2022 eclipse seasons and cycles, but our emphasis here today will be on the first eclipse season. So the subjects we want to cover today, we'll look here next. Some eclipse facts, some information about the upcoming eclipse seasons, a little bit of history about the current nodal and Saros cycles. And then we'll talk about, a more practical level, the connections with personal charts, and then also making some ceremonial suggestions. And then near the end, we'll take a look at a few notable charts to see how some well-known public figures, they have things on their charts that are connected to these eclipse seasons. And then
At the very end, we'll look ahead to the next eclipse season about 6 months from now. So let's look and see what some of these eclipse facts are.
Okay.
So eclipses are part of the complex relationship between the sun, moon, and earth. They are extra potent new and full moons, which our school calls super new moons or super full moons. That's a little different than what the astronomers do with those terms right now. And the reason we call them that is because they're hugely amplified new moons and full moons. And there would be 2 of those each year for the full moon and 2 for the new moon. Eclipses occur when the sun, moon, and earth align and one casts a shadow, either the earth solar eclipse on the moon or the earth shadow is cast on the moon during a full moon. This kind of alignment is often called a syzygy, which is a term used usually for eclipses, but it actually can be also used for 3 or 4 planets together, so that can also be a syzygy. Eclipses are, and this is actually this part now I'm going to share, it has to do with the really complex patterns of the sun, moon, and earth. And actually, there are a number of different things that are brought into account for when we look at eclipses. The nodal cycles and also the Saros cycle and then also the sun and moon cycles themselves. We actually have a whole course dedicated to that because it's far more to teach in a short video blog like this. So let's go on to the next one. Each year has 2 eclipse seasons separated by about 6 months. And in 2 days or so, we'll be going into the first eclipse season of 2022. Every eclipse season has at least 2 eclipses, 1 solar, 1 lunar. Sometimes it can have 3 eclipses, totaling 6 or 5, sometimes 5, but then it can be as many as 6. And this is rare, much more rare than the situation which is more, quote, normal this year. Each solar eclipse can be surrounded by 2 very minor penumbral lunar eclipses, 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after, or a total lunar eclipse is surrounded by 2 very minor partial solar eclipses, 2 weeks before or after. That doesn't happen this year. As you see here, 3 in a season occurs about 8 times every 28 years. And just so you're all clear about this, solar eclipses will always occur with the new moon, super new moon, so it's an amplification of the new moon energy. Let's look at the next one. Now, one of the more unique features of the approach that our school and the paradigm takes is to look and see whether the eclipse is at the north node or the south node. And here's a way in which the Saros cycle, which is the cycle of the different eclipses, like families of eclipses, will interact with the nodal cycle. And we use a lot of information about the nodes and the use of the nodes in the school. So it's kind of like the south node is where we're coming from, and where the north node is what we're moving to. So there's a little bit of a more future orientation when it's a north node one. And the partial solar that's coming up in a couple of days is a north node one. While the really massive and powerful total lunar eclipse 2 weeks later is at the south node. The pattern is reversed in the eclipse season this fall. So just to keep this clear, we're reiterating certain points here. So the solar eclipse at the north node, which is the one we're about to have, this is a seed point in a place of conscious intention, a portal into possible futures, if and only if the shadow of the personal and collective past is addressed. Now, all eclipses have that shadow feature, but we could kind of say that the north node ones have a bit less than the south node ones. But in either case, you don't want to just immediately go into the future. It always, with eclipses, it has to do with taking into account the shadow that mistakes that have happened in the mystery schools collectively, or also then relative to your own personal chart. The idea here is that even if your own chart is not connected to where the nodal axis or the Saros cycle degrees are, you can still work with this ceremonially, collectively, based on the shadow and the mistakes of the past associated with these signs. The signs represent, because the thing is that the entirety of this eclipse season is about the Taurus Scorpio axis. And so it can either be the south node version of it or the north node version of it. As you see here, the lunar north node eclipse, and we'll have one of those in the fall, emphasizes the future. The north node is more about the future directional flow of personal and collective humanity. And it can include our soul's intention to reach its destination point, but only after first addressing the past. And then we have the lunar south node eclipse, which is the one that's coming up in 2 weeks. And that strongly relates to our collective past and where personal and collective humanity have previously been. These may be areas where we need to have conscious awareness of before we can go forward. Let's take a look at this is actually, we clearly are not going to have time historically to look at all of this, but I wanted you to have this information so you can see how the nodal pattern, which is 18.6 years, and I said 19 years because 18.6 rounds up to 19, and we have the metonic lunar return at 19. And here we have the pattern of the north node in Scorpio from 1910 through 2096. And you can then zero in to where we are now, January 2022 to July 17th, 2023. And then also you can see the pattern of the south node in Scorpio, which we have the dates of all of that over there also. And so these interweave, the north node in Scorpio, the south node in Scorpio. And that also then goes into the whole initiatory process of the nodal return and the nodal reversal on individual charts, which we will speak about when we look at how you can use the nodal pattern and the eclipse pattern related to your own individual chart. So that's this. So there's the nodal pattern, 18.6. And we've given you the information about the Scorpio and Taurus ones. But let's look at the next slide now. Now we have this. Now we have the Saros eclipse pattern. And I provided you with the dates here from 1950 to 2094. And here we are including the Saros 119, which is the solar Saros. And then we're including the lunar Saros of the full moon, a total eclipse. And there's you can see how long these families last. There's 71 events for the solar, and actually, Mary, just make note of this. That should be 72 events. You can go to, it says 21 events. That should actually be 72 at that point. I'm just noticing that that typo at this point. So okay. It's 71 or 72 events over a time period over 1,000 years. I started this in 1950 because for the solar eclipse in this Saros 119. This is a fairly minor one. If what it is you're looking at for is total solar eclipses. There were a series of annular eclipses, but that one ended March 18th, 1950. And now this particular Saros, you can see it ends 2112, is fading away. And if you look down from 1968, 1986, 2004, down to 2094, you can see the magnitude gets less and less. The one today, or in a couple days, 0.639. So what that number represents is the percentage of the sun that is covered. So it would be a 1.0 if it had reached the totality. And by the time we get to 2094, it's really a partial solar eclipse. Then on the right column is Saros 131, and this is a pretty powerful lunar eclipse sequence. It started in 1427, and you can see the magnitude is increasing. On April 2nd, 1950, it was 1.0333, meaning it was just past where the moon would be eclipsed by the shadow. Okay, but then it increases. So by the time we get to the one on May 16th, it's almost 1.5. So therefore, this becomes a more central location of the shadow on the moon. But then it keeps increasing. The same Saros has its maximum one, almost double, and that is a really central one, 1.8234. We've also provided you here where the degrees are. So you can see here, April 30th, 2022. Wait a second. What is that? May 11th. April 30th, 2022, 10 Taurus. Yes. And then we have the one at 25 Scorpio coming up May 15th, end of 15, early May 16th, depending on where you are. So there we have those degrees to work with for these. Now, 10 and 25, Taurus, Scorpio. You can actually get a lot of insight and a lot of clues regarding how this works by looking back and forth between the nodal pattern and the eclipse pattern. What do we have as the next slide? Oh, okay. Wasn't there another one on eclipse factoids where it talks about the Saros?
It was at the very end here where the Saros cycles, the very last point.
Right. That one, sorry. We didn't discuss that. If the degrees of the eclipse are within 10 degrees on either side of your sun, moon, natal chart angles, or personal planets, you're on the front lines of the eclipse. And then you can also see how the nodal cycles relate to that with the same idea. A Saros is a family of eclipses that occurs every 18 years, 11 days. The repeating pattern of eclipse series occurs between 1226 and 1550 number of years. And it says it's comprised of 69 to 87 eclipses. The ones we're referring to this year is 71 events and 72 events. So it's kind of sort of right at the one of them, not quite in the middle, kind of at the beginning. The Saros cycle, the nodal cycle, remember the Saros is 18 years, 11 days. The nodal cycle is 18.6. And then the third of a really important of the complex lunar cycles is the Metonic, which happens every 19 years exactly. And they're the three most important cycles that involve the moon. These rather complex cycles also include the lunar standstill cycle, of which we'll be talking a whole heck of a lot of going forward in these next couple of years as we reach the maximum lunar standstill in 2024, 2025. Hopefully that's enough of just the factoids on it, okay? And again, we have like a whole course that covers all of this in some detail. It is rather complex, particularly when you start interweaving the nodal cycle with the Saros cycles. But now let's look at what the charts look like for, here's the one coming up.
April 30th, partial solar eclipse.
Which is slightly more than half. And it is actually, if you're into the visibility aspect of it, it's a pretty narrow path. And the only parts of the Earth where this is actually seen as a partial is in Antarctica and a small portion of South America. It'll be partial all through the southern part of South America, and then also particularly like along the coast of Chile. And Tierra del Fuego gets it pretty strong, and then Western Australia, Antarctica, not Australia. So it's not going to be visible in the area of the world where most of the people listening to this are going to be. It still, though, is a super new moon. And if you happen to have on your natal chart something in those vicinities there, the vicinity of that's, maybe from 5 to 15, Taurus, Scorpio, Leo, Aquarius, your chart would have a relationship here. I also want to mention another thing here, so you can maybe have a better understanding about how these eclipse cycles work and why they might be total or only partial. You'll notice here that the exact sun-moon conjunction is at 10:28 Taurus. The north node, and as we said, this is a north node eclipse, is 22. That's 12 degrees. It's got to be a lot closer to the sun-moon degree for it to be a total eclipse. If it was much further away than 12 degrees, then you don't even get a partial. So that's just something to take note of when we get in a moment when we look at the full moon lunar eclipse. Now, just notice for a moment the remarkable configurations that are happening here. You'll see the marvelous and spectacular gathering of Mars, Venus, and Jupiter. We actually put up a Facebook post earlier yesterday, about the Venus-Neptune conjunction. And then you can see Venus and Jupiter there. And at the point of the solar eclipse, it's within an hour and a half of the exact conjunction of Venus and Jupiter at the time of the eclipse. And then notice that Uranus, how close Uranus is to the sun and the moon. So there's some very powerful signatures there. And for those who have been watching the morning sky, they're strung out beautifully. Saturn above Mars, Mars above Venus and Jupiter, that are getting closer and closer together. We could see that this morning here where we live. You might want to now reference the next one, which is the Venus-Jupiter conjunction. Don't want to leave this out, even though it's not an eclipse slide, but it's just because the Venus-Jupiter is so close to the solar eclipse. So it becomes a marvelous signature of the solar eclipse.
It's less than an hour later than the exact eclipse, correct?
Right.
Or the exact moon-sun conjunction, yeah.
One of the things that we lucked out on over here in this part of Asia is that the point where they're closest together is about 5 in the morning here, while the point where they're closest together in the U.S. is during the day. So you could actually see them closest in the morning sky, 2 different morning skies. The morning sky before Saturday morning, and then also Sunday morning, I guess, right? But we'll see how close they get. It'll be really interesting if we have a clear sky to see. They're almost touching. They're like at the same declination, same longitude. Just for reference here, Venus and Jupiter together is not that rare. It happens every year between 11 and 15 months apart. But sometimes when they come together, they're not so easily seen. But we have a very great time period to notice Venus and Jupiter together in the morning sky, pretty high up. And also just to remember when you are seeing this, that right behind them, or close right behind, but not being seen, is Neptune. So it's a very, very strong, emphasis on Pisces. While meanwhile, we see the emphasis so strongly on Uranus when we go over to the where the sun and the moon actually are. So that's a lot of upper world or celestial world emphasis, really, as far as I can see. And the Pisces emphasis, as we've on previous vlogcasts and some articles and seminars, we've emphasized the importance of the Jupiter-Neptune process, which is like seeding 166 years, so there's a lot of seeding going on here, including the seed point of this eclipse season, which is the super new moon, which is the moon sun conjunct here in Taurus. While you're hearing me discuss this, as we are looking at these charts, just pay attention to, or you might already be thinking about this, about how these configurations relate to your own personal chart. And I know there's a couple of, the two of us that are speaking right now definitely have connections. My own nodal axis is Taurus, Scorpio, and I have particular connection to the lunar eclipse, and I believe very much you do too. We can discuss that when we go to the next chart. So here we have the super full moon south node eclipse. Why south node eclipse? Because the moon is, look how close it is to the south node, which is why it's a pretty central total eclipse. I should also note here that this particular total lunar eclipse is very, very prominently visible for people in North America. In fact, every city, every major city, every part of the United States, continental United States, and Alaska actually also will experience totality. We didn't put the data up on this on the previous slides, but I just wanted to let you all know that the whole process of the lunar eclipse takes 5 hours and 19 minutes. And if you happen to be in a zone where you have all parts of it, okay? And the totality part of it, if you happen to be in a place, and even around Sacramento, that far, the whole west coast of the United States, and also where you live, Mary, you get 1 hour and 24 minutes of totality. Actually, you're at the very point where I believe it's here's something it's really good for you all to know. There is a website, rather than me like telling you, well, what time is it going to be, in San Francisco or in Kansas City or Washington, D.C. or Anchorage, Alaska, or Honolulu. There is a great website. It's called timeanddate.com. And it will show you with tremendous detail, and you can actually put in your cursor any city you want across the United States, across Mexico, across Canada, that will give you the beginning point, the amount of time that it's total, and the end point of the eclipse. It's a very, very useful tool. We won't see it over here in Asia. However, the even slightly more central lunar eclipse that is happening in the second eclipse season will be centered in on Asia. And here's something that's actually quite interesting to know, which we'll have an opportunity to talk about a lot as we go through the other even more remarkable for the United States in particular eclipses of 2023 and 2024, which is that the paths cross, the actual physical paths of the annular eclipses and the solar eclipses will cross in the United States. But you can actually, if you, the factor that a lot of people maybe not be aware of is that in this way the Saruses work is that every third eclipse, and that would also be true for the lunar eclipses too. And I looked this up, Mary, because we talked about this, previously, that every third lunar eclipse is centered in on a particular area. Every third solar eclipse is centered in on a particular area. But the difference is that with the lunar eclipses, it's half-half. It's just shifted around a little bit because it's based upon whether it's day or night. While the solar eclipses are a much narrower path, so you don't ever get a whole hemisphere, experiencing it. But they do jump around over different parts of the globe. So keep that in mind, that you all in the US area will actually be the ones that are that get the experience for this next season. Well, those of us over here in Asia will get the next one, which is in the fall. So pay attention, tuning in again as you're looking at this to see how it lines up with your own charts. And I know for me, I have Mars at 25 Scorpio, so this should have should be somehow connected with this, I would think. And how about you, Mary? I know you got a lot going on with this.
I have my Mars and my ascendant right there, within 5 degrees closer, I think even. Yep. And then my Taurus moon is opposite it. So, yep.
And it's real close to, the way your angles are.
Yes. Yes, I have. That's true. I have my Leo in Venus at 20. So that's pretty close. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, one of the ways I like to look at it is that if it's conjunct an angle or an inner planet, or if it's so close to the nodes, then we're using the imagery of new moon and full moon. So therefore, it's it's a seed point, or when we're thinking of the full moon, it's like an illumination. So it's like the way we would think of working with the lunar cycle each month. You have the new moon seed point, and then you have the full moon, which is full consciousness. But then again, if we say full consciousness, we also have to say the reason why the ancients came up with something, even more recent times, the word lunatic, was the fact that full awareness it can sometimes be pretty hard to handle, so it's kind of be overwhelming. It's like if you go out under a full moon, that which has usually been dark has now become shadow. So it's the illumination of that. And if we can see it with awareness, well, then great, we've expanded our awareness. Otherwise, it can be kind of scary. Actually, in some of the more mystic traditions, I heard this back when I was spending a lot of time taking people out in groups for lunar eclipses, that there's definitely a phenomena that happens where that shadow seems to be out. In fact, a well-known spiritual teacher, Pierre Vilayet, used to always say that the only time he liked to stay indoors was during a lunar eclipse. He was kind of afraid of it. Now, I don't want to go that far with it, but I think that if you do a group for a lunar eclipse, stay together as a group. Don't scatter or wander off alone. So it's really great to work in ceremony with a group. Or you focus your attention, with 1 or 2 people, with your partner or your small group, or if you put together a group, should you have the courage to do that, then you got to actually put a lot more intention into holding the space of it. So yes, Mary.
I was just going to say, we really considered a time out of time, because what you said, that the span of this is 5 hours. And so within that time, we have an event that mirrors what normally would take 24 hours. So it's like a baby day within a day.
Well, no, what would take place over a month?
Oh,
You know,
remote, yes.
yeah, it starts with the full moon.
Mhm.
It wanes to a new moon when there's basically no look. The moon is not seen at all. There's no phase, and then it builds back up to full moon. So that brings up, so certainly at the very least, it encapsulates in 5 hours something that could be thought of as a full month, but I like to think of it as at least 6 months, a seed point for 6 months. But then this is a question that the astrological community is not in agreement about, which is how long does the quote effect last? These days, I think there's a presaging that happens even before. You know, so you can have events that happen before, but then also how long after? At least 6 months. I'm working with the idea of about 3 years, but as I say, there's different opinions on that, and I would imagine that it also matters how total it is. You know, so if you have a total solar, it would seem to me that that would the range of quote effects from it would be longer than if it's a partial. That's all really quite speculative as far as the global impact of it. I've seen enough evidence that the places where the track of a solar eclipse goes across the Earth does seem to connect with events before and after. It'd be interesting to see with the partial solar eclipse being in Chile and being in Antarctica, whether who knows, it might relate to that large area of the West Antarctica ice shelf that is falling off. So there's that, the intense drought that is happening in that part of Chile, and things like that. And we'll have plenty of time to speculate on all of this when we talk about the tracks of the total solar and annular eclipses that are crisscrossing the United States in 2023 and 2024. It's less clear about stuff like that with the total lunar eclipse because it covers such a, like half the Earth. It just kind of shifts around a little bit, so it kind of comes back to the same point every third one. Yeah, so take note of this, and you will notice here that on this chart that Saturn is also squaring the nodal axis and the eclipse degrees of the sun and the moon. There, the Saturn at 24 Aquarius, and so don't forget to think of the squares now, and also the Leo Aquarius configurations and how that might relate to these degrees on your own chart. I did want to offer a few more things here regarding ceremony. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do ceremony. And like in the approach of our school, is it really depends archetypally on how elaborate the ceremony will be. I mean, some people who don't necessarily want to do the total theatrical productions, just simply being aware of it and being with it in presence can be ceremony. So, I mean, maybe an Aries type is going to do it different than a Virgo type, for example. But still, there's some general suggestions we can make that I've noticed in working with eclipses actually since the early 1980s. Say for the lunar eclipse, that whole time period of where it's full and then it dwindles and it wanes to what is sometimes called the blood moon, because it's like a perigee moon happening. That's the time period to actually be calling out, working with the shadow. Don't avoid that. And even if there's nothing to do with your own chart on it, consider it the collective, the global, the historical circumstances of that. And then certainly if it's your own, be willing to look at that and call it out. Then during the exact point, which for the lunar eclipse is an hour and 24 minutes, that's like a portal. And that's where basically I would suggest, that we always suggest when we work with groups, that's like going into meditation. You know, that's going into complete presence. And then and receiving whatever needs to be received, you know, with an open heart. And then as the moon starts to come back, you know, little by little by little till it comes back to fullness, that would be the time of speaking out what you'd like things to be, you know. So it becomes like a powerful seeding for the next phase of world, global, and personal history. I've even noticed that when we're talking about a 5-hour time period, that it can be during those last couple of hours. You know, that's when you can have celebration. You know, that's when you can, you know, share your meal, song and dance, you know, drumming and all the rest of that, you know. So that doesn't have to be in focused silent meditation at that point, you know. So that's like coming back into fullness, right? With a solar eclipse, it's kind of the same thing, except it's encapsulated, it's shorter. You know, so the point of the partial eclipse or the full eclipse is the portal. But it's still kind of the same idea that before it becomes total, you're dealing with the shadow material, you receive transmission during the exact portal, and then it's the seeding, you know. Then it's like what happens like after, I mean, you can even look at it as when you finally see the tiny crescent sun, all right, that could be equivalent to seeing the tiny crescent moon, you know, after the new moon point, you know. So you can actually think of the sun in that respect like the moon. So these are just some ideas, and I'm very open to getting feedback from people who work with you know, the eclipses, and you know, in different ways, or see what happens if you try it this way, and what your experiences are. I don't want, I mean, I could go on and on here about what are the things that have happened in previous lunar eclipse events that I've done. Boy, that's really, really amazing stuff. That would go into a whole extra video to talk about that. The ones at Mount Shasta, the ones at Faywood Hot Springs, and when we've done, you know, lunar eclipse events at Gale's Place in Sarita, we've done them. As far as the total solar, I've only seen two. The great one that happened in Oregon on the West Coast. I think you were part of that group, right?
I was, and we did do
Yeah.
ceremony. Yep, we released what we no longer wanted while it was waning, and then we burnt that, and then we announced our intention and put that in writing and gave it back to the mother after the main event when it was coming
Right.
back. Mhm.
That was such a beautiful time to walk out, to spend, you know, we hiked out about an hour or so out to the gorge, looking down at the Columbia River Gorge and looking across at another portion of Oregon. And it was really cloudy at first, but then it just kind of dissipated just in time for it. The only other time that I personally have experienced a total solar was in Bolivia. Up on the Altiplano of Bolivia. That was a really long one, but I've also struck out on a number of them, you know, where you, I actually went all the way to the island of Mongaya in the Cook Islands for one, and it got, well, that's a whole other story, which I won't get into now, but that one didn't work out. This one in 1991 in Hawaii didn't work out either. I'm kind of as you can tell from this conversation, I've been an eclipse junkie very much, and the 2023-24 eclipses have been on my mind a lot. So yes, this will create fertile ground and a pregnant space for the great work of the greater reset. Yes, deep within the deepest descent of the Kali Yuga and part of this great turning of the ages.
Right. And if any of our people that are listening are living in parts of the world that will see that partial solar, just a reminder to wear your protective lenses and not look directly at the sun.
Well, particularly for a partial, you can if you're in the umbra, you can look, but not when it's partial. Those lenses are really helpful for that. Actually, if you have one of those lenses, it's also a very cool way to look at all the sunspots that are on the sun right now.
Ooh, thank you for that. I will pull mine out.
There's a huge amount of huge sunspots. It's partly why we're having X-class coronal mass ejections and all kinds of powerful aurora effects happening on the planet right now. Maybe that's could be thought of as the Neptune, the celestial, the Neptune and the Uranian connection to all this stuff. Let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, well, just so you can get a sense of how to work with this on your natal chart, as I'm suggesting, if it's conjunction, it's definitely an amplification. In the amplification, like a full moon or a super full moon or a super new moon, I would say there's fairly large orbs for that. In fact, probably the large orbs, it would make sense to use the larger orbs because actually the eclipses themselves, having even a partial lunar or a partial solar will go up to about 15 degrees, between the degree of the node and the degree of the actual full moon and the new moon. So maybe having 10, 15 degree orb can be useful, but obviously the closer the better, So if it's really zeroed in on the exact degrees, then we're really onto something. I think it might be interesting at this point to jump ahead. I'm just feeling the flow on this right now, to jump ahead to the two that are in the fall.
Oh, that's what this is. This is October 25th. This is the first one in the second season of 2022.
So here we have also a situation where you can see the nodes are quite far from where the sun-moon conjunction is, and which is why it's a partial, and about half. So, and we'll be doing another investigation of this eclipse season later on, all dedicated to this. But I wanted you to see how these are still kind of in the same zone. Here we have the Scorpio, Taurus, and in this time period, you'll see Uranus is still pretty strongly involved. In fact, we'll be having a whole extra seminar during our solstice seminars regarding the phenomena that happens in early October, which is, just stunning, which is on the same 24-hour time period. We have the final closeness of Saturn square Uranus. I mean, you can see Saturn square Uranus within about 1 degree there. Saturn at 18 Aquarius, Uranus at 17 Aquarius. But in early October, it's also the time when the North Node and Uranus are exactly conjunct, actually within the same few days as when the exact closest point of Saturn square Uranus, the fourth of those squares. A lot of other people have been catching on to this, that there were the 3 exact squares of 2021, but it's not like Uranus Saturn was over, because there's an almost exact another square happening this fall. So take a look at that. You can also see that Venus in the underworld there. So in the Venus cycle, there's Venus conjunct the Sun there. So that one, which is the South Node eclipse, is happening at the point of the very close to the greatest exactness of Venus and her Inanna underworld sojourn. So that's also something that I'm sure we'll be talking a bunch about as we get closer to that time period. And you'll see also that still there, I mean, that's around the time period of the where Pluto is still rather strongly involved with the US Pluto. Let's take a look at the full moon.
That one's November 8th. That is the
US election day.
wow.
And Venus is still in the underworld with Mercury. But you'll see that it's a very central, full lunar eclipse. And why? Because you can see how close the nodal axis is to the actual syzygy of the moon and the sun with the node. So a very major feature of the latter in the year, the second eclipse season of the year, is the Venus underworld. Just as currently it's that very powerful Neptunian influence that with Uranus. I mean, so Uranus is a player for both of them, right? So that's just a little preview of what's coming next, and you can see the same kinds of degrees are involved. You know, it's still there in the mid Taurus Scorpio, and Saturn is at 18 still. You know, you see, so 18 Aquarius. You know, so that that's like forming like a T-square with the Sun Moon axis there. Again, it's just bringing into play, well, your chart and mine, you know, still, right? You know, particularly yours, you know, I mean, because you've got that 18th degree, I think, pretty prominent, and 22 and that whole zone. And I'm sure that a bunch of you listening probably will notice you have the same phenomena. Now, I thought
Uranus right on there. I mean, Uranus is conjuncted, isn't it? Pretty much.
yeah, exact. So, I mean, you know, I'm sure some people are noticing that that just a few days after this solar partial is the day each year when the Sun and Uranus are conjunct. But here we have exactly on the lunar eclipse point date, November 8th, US election date. There's Uranus exactly with the moon and the North Node, you know, after it had been exactly on the North Node just a few weeks before that. So stunning stuff to consider as you go through this. And again, you know, there's two ways to look at this. And I keep talking about personal and collective. You know, your own chart may be on the front lines, in the portal, you know, in the super full moon, super new moon, and so on. But then again, on your personal chart, you may not have a connection, but you can still, in these portals, work with your own connection to the mistakes in the shadow, as well as what your intention would be for those signs. And then the other thing would be, what about the collective, you know, the collectivity? And I thought it would be really interesting to look at some prominent well-known figures and some of the things that are in the news right now to see whether there's a connection to these eclipses.
Here we are.
So we're going to actually start by looking at the charts of Joe Biden and Putin. And their charts have an extremely interesting relationship with each other, worthy of a whole vlogcast to look at their dance. But you can see here that here not only is Joe Biden in his age 79 Mars return, the most exact Mars return, but look at the relationship of these eclipses to his scorpionic planets. Even the 0 Taurus one there is close to the 2nd degree, you know, in the eclipse season at the end of the year. So I would say that all of those Taurus and Scorpio placements are certainly connected to these two coming eclipse seasons. the lunar eclipse in a couple of weeks is right on the Sun, Venus, Mercury area, particularly the Sun, Venus area of the chart. And then the solar eclipse is opposite Mars, on this chart. So that there's definitely he's definitely on the front lines of these eclipse seasons. But take a look now at Putin's chart. Now you look here, Venus at 11 Scorpio, Scorpio rising. Venus and Mars conjunct between those two guys' charts. There's something going on there where one, they sure don't seem to like each other, but they got definitely something that they're working out. And look at the Jupiter Taurus, 19 Taurus. So I would certainly say that there's a very strong relationship between the eclipse seasons here and this guy's chart, and then also his own nodal axis. Look, 19 Aquarius, 19 Leo. So that's also in the same zone. Now, speaking of that, let's look at the Russian Federation. This is the chart of the Russian Federation that was formed after the Bolshevik Revolution, and Putin seems to enjoy the boundaries and the history that happened from that time period in the way he addresses the situation in Ukraine. But look at that chart and think of the connection between this chart and what we just saw with Putin's chart, and particularly Joe Biden's chart. No, not that one yet. Here we have the Soviet Union Federation from 1922, 27 Taurus moon, Venus 28 Scorpio, Jupiter at 13 Scorpio. The angles, 18 Taurus, 18 Scorpio. I think this can't be ignored. I mean, there's such a connection just between Putin's chart and this chart, and then the particular cycles of the eclipse seasons that are happening to this chart. There's much to unpack with that, but I just definitely wanted to show you how the Russian Federation chart connects. You see, there's not a whole lot on the US chart that connects to this eclipse season, but boy, is there ever in the following 2 years. So there's something very major being worked out here with Putin and the Russian Federation. And then kind of like Biden at his Mars return is kind of caught up in the same circuitry. I just wanted to throw it out here, not because there's as many connections, but just so you can see what Zelensky's chart looks like.
There you
go. There is the Leo portion of it. By the way, this did not come out right. It should have been a Gemini rising chart. How did that happen? Anyway, his chart is actually Gemini rising, but the rest of it is accurate with Mars and the moon in Leo. Let's see, do I have the actual, it's actually 2 p.m. That's what happened there. So it's a Gemini, if you look at this chart as a Gemini rising, there's literally no way you could have a better horoscope of an actor. And of course, he is an actor. We got all that Leo, you've got the Gemini ascendant. It's a precise, perfect expression archetypally of an actor, one who is like presents himself as part of a Hollywood production, actually. And that's been going on a long time, and the chart really doesn't lie regarding it. Just had a couple others here very briefly to look at. Xi Jinping Here we've got Pluto at 21 Leo, Venus at 8 Taurus, and the moon at 5 Leo. So basically that's the connection points on this chart. The nodal axis, the moon in Leo, Pluto at 21 Leo, Venus at 8 Taurus. So there'd be those connections. There's a number of amazing connections between his chart and the chart of China itself. And it is not lost on those who look at all of this that he does consider himself to be the successor to Mao Zedong, although his chart is not quite as extreme as Mao's chart. And then you have that for reference here if you want to see this. And then here we've got Anthony Fauci. Now there's no birth time on this guy, but here we have 22 Scorpio Mars and Moon at 4 Scorpio, Uranus at 22 Taurus. And then you have Saturn. Look at Jupiter and Saturn there at, you know, in those, it's right at all the same degrees we've been talking about. Pluto square on the moon, Saturn opposed the moon. Of course, the moon could be a few later degrees than that because it's 7 a.m. chart. We don't know his exact birth time. But clearly, lots of that chart is involved in the current eclipse seasons. And certainly we could say that for those that follow this guy's career, he's kind of being eclipsed right now. Fortunately, but he's had a long run. I mean, necessarily, I mean, sort of, we can understand that when we see he was born with Jupiter, Saturn conjunct in Taurus, you know, a long life of being the head of the medical mafia for so long, you know. But that to me, that's a chart of a gangster right there, if any chart if I've ever seen, quite frankly. I mean, if we just look at it archetypally. All right, and then do we have anything else there? Israel. See, Israel is a really major player in this. It's the third most spoken language in Israel, Russian, that is, I mean. And there's some who say that actually some of what Israel is doing is pulling the strings, you know, including Khazarian connections and the whole bigger story than we can do here. But you can see there is definitely a connection there with the Israel chart. The sun at 23 Taurus, the nodal axis, 14 Taurus, 14 Scorpio. And then look at Saturn and Leo with Pluto, you know, so there's a much being worked out when you look at the events happening in Israel, and particularly with the Palestinians at this point, and the ways that they are actually pulling some strings behind the scenes. Even when Zelensky said, we want to turn the Ukraine into another Israel, which is very interesting when you kind of see these kind of connections. So there's much to unpack regarding Israel's connection with all of this. And I think that's all we had, right?
That is all.
Yeah. So I think we covered all of it, and this hopefully gives you a lot to think about, and at the very least, as those that work these ways with this kind of paradigm, the shamanic astrology paradigm, we always look at it with a three worlds approach. We're tremendously aware of what's actually happening in front of us and of objective reality. We also go to the celestial, all, you know, that particularly from the Neptunian perspective, that all is well. There is this universal consciousness that exists no matter what it is that happens down here on planet Earth. And then there's the underworld, which is not to be afraid of noticing where the shadow is and what needs to be composted, both personally and collectively. And just pay attention to these timings, and as best as you can, and I'm sure we're not the only ones that are pointing this out, you know, work together with friends and allies and family to be aware of these timings and these portals, and what is possible with a group intention and open-hearted intention to create a world that's better for the majority of the planet, not just humans, but the animals, the anima mundi, and the plants, and all of the natural world. Actually, I just thought of something to just close this with, which is a perfect Sabian symbol for the for the lunar eclipse. It's just stunningly precise for what we're dealing with. It's the Rajarian image, American Indians making camp after moving into a new territory. The ability to adjust to a new situation swiftly by tuning into its requirements. And then Rajar writes this: those who live in harmony with nature, moving on as new needs arise, finds themselves intuitively at home everywhere. You do not make demands upon life, for they are identified with the great rhythms of the biosphere and its functions at peace with what they produce. This is the message of the American Indian culture, which European invaders so wantonly and meaninglessly destroyed nearly everywhere. Western man had lost faith in life because he wants to dominate and enslave manifestations. So that certainly describes the necessity to look at the collective shadow and mistakes of the dominant culture. And so we have an opportunity to do that now and not to be afraid to look at it. So any final thoughts, Mary? Thank you for so much with helping me with this. And I think we got a lot to unpack and to think about here. So until next time,
Thank you.
good adventures, everyone. Good meditations, and tune in, and may it all go well for you.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Saturday and Sunday this week. Enjoy. Bye-bye.
Mhm.